Hi, and welcome to my presentation on dehydrating fruits and vegetables. My name is Diane Witten. I'm the food and nutrition educator for Cornell Cooperative Extension of Saratoga County. I am a certified master food preserver, and I've been teaching home food preservation for just about 20 years now. The presentation that I'm doing was adapted with permission from the University of Georgia at the National Center of Home Food Preservation. What you'll be learning is dehydrating methods, different ways of dehydrating. We'll talk about choosing dehydrators, what to look for, and the factors that affect the quality and safety of the food that you're dehydrating. And then, of course, some resources. So I want to start with the resources. We'd like you to use the USDA National Center for Home Food Preservation as your primary resource. And that is housed at the University of Georgia. That's why you've got the website, the uga.edu website, or the easier website to remember is homefoodpreservation.net, or homefoodpreservation.com will get you there also. This is the home page for the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And if you look on the left here, you'll see How Do I section. So if you go to How Do I Dry, you click on that, you'll come to this page with a lot of information on drying foods. And I also want you to know about my website at Cornell Cooperative Extension, ccesaratoga.org. If you look under Nutrition, Food, and Food Preservation, you'll come to this page where I do have a link to the National Center for Home Food Preservation and other resources having to do not just with drying foods, but with all types of food preservation and fact sheets on the right. On the left-hand side, you'll see a link to videos that I think were particularly helpful, including some of my other food preservation videos that I've done on different food preservation topics. So for food preservation, let's get started with a little bit of the history of it. It is the oldest method of food preservation, dating back 12,000 years BC in the Middle East, where mostly sun and wind was used as natural dryers. But they also constructed what was called still houses, using fire for heat in colder climates. And then with the advent of electricity, it changed everything. But it wasn't until 1980 that that real iconic cylindrical commercial dehydrator was patented. What are the advantages? Why would you want to dehydrate food over other forms of food preservation? Well, dehydrating is basically quite simple to do. It requires a minimal amount of equipment, supplies, ingredients. Dehydrated foods it reduces the size and weight of the food. So the food takes up less space. It's easy to transport for like hiking, camping, and it does have a relatively long shelf life. Some of the disadvantages are the time it takes to dehydrate. Something like herbs and parsley might just take an hour, but peaches might take up to 48 hours. In a dehydrator, it might even take longer, 2 to 6 days in the sun. While you're dehydrating, it does require some of your attention to watch the food, check it for dryness, because there's no specific time when it's done. You have to check it to see if it is done. And sometimes flipping it, rotating trays is necessary to get even drying. Dehydrating is not suitable for all foods, not even all fruits and vegetables. Olives, for instance, are one thing that do not dehydrate well. And dehydrating also causes the greatest nutrient loss of any form of food preservation. How does drying preserve food? Well, microorganisms that deteriorate food, like yeast, molds, and bacteria, they need water to grow. So removing the moisture prevents spoilage from microorganisms. Fruit is usually dried to about 20% moisture content, and vegetables are dried to 90% moisture. The difference being that fruit has a lot of sugar in it, and the sugar also helps to act as a preservative, so it doesn't have to be quite as dry. And by drying this, it also reduces enzyme actions, which helps to preserve color, texture, and quality. When you're looking at a method for drying, you've got to control for air circulation. Moving air definitely encourages evaporation, which will increase drying, decreased drying time. And the temperature is going to vary between 95 degrees to 140 degrees, depending on what you're drying. We're talking about fruits and vegetables here, so 140 degrees is usually the highest temperature for drying fruits. If you dry too slowly, your microorganisms will have a chance to grow before the food is dry. If you dry too fast and too high a temperature, you could cook the food or end up with what's called case hardening, which is where the outside of the food gets dry and then it doesn't allow the remaining moisture in it to evaporate. And so that could result in mold. So we'll talk about two basic methods, inside and outside. So outside, there's solar drying, sun drying, vine drying. Inside, just drying things in the room, in an oven or a dehydrator. So let's look at those separately. Sun drying, unfortunately, in New York State and in the Northeast and the Southeast, where it's humid, sun drying really is not an option. It works best for foods that are high in sugar, like fruits, and some vegetables like peppers, beans, and peas. But you need hot weather, 85 degrees or higher, and a low humidity, less than 60%. And in the Northeast and the Southeast, where when the temperature is high, the humidity tends to be high too. And then having a nice breeze is also helpful. But if you do dry foods outside with sun drying, you need to pasteurize it after it's been dried to kill any insects or insect eggs that might have gotten on the food while it's outside drying. So basically, the plus side of sun drying is the low cost because it's not using electricity. You can do a lot at one time. And the downside is that it does take several days. Solar drying is a type of sun drying, but because you're using a special apparatus that you might purchase or build by yourself, and plans for these can be gotten through the internet, through cooperative extension. But the temperature actually is increased by 20 to 30 degrees over regular solar drying. So it will decrease the amount of time it takes to dry. But you're still going to want to pasteurize the food before or after drying outdoors. This is a picture of a solar dryer that was designed and built by UC Davis, University of California at Davis. And they came up with this design to help people in less developed countries, to help individuals dry their food. And by adding that chimney on the end, it really increases the airflow. And so it reduces the drying time. It cuts the solar drying time in half. And directions for building this and videos for building this can be found at University of California, Davis, through their website. Just search for chimney solar dryer. Vine drying, some foods like dry beans, navy kidney beans, all of those, lentil, soybeans, if they're just left on the vine, they'll dry. And again, those would require pasteurization. In order to pasteurize foods that have been dried outside, there are two different methods. One is the freezer method. If you put it in the freezer at 0 degrees or below for at least 48 hours, it'll kill any insects and their eggs. Or you can do it in the oven at 160 degrees for 30 minutes. Indoor drying, this basic simple one, is room drying, and that's works for herbs and nuts and chili peppers, but still you do want a warm room with low humidity. Fan for controlling air movement also helps. And you can do that just by putting the food on trays or tying them on strings and hanging them, or hanging them in a paper bag. This is a low-cost method, but it might take several days for the food to dry. I will talk more about drying herbs indoors a little later. Another method you can use indoors is oven drying, but you have to have an oven that can maintain a temperature of 140 to 150 degrees, which is hard to find. A lot of ovens don't go that low. But if you do have one, especially if you have like a convection oven that has a fan in it, that can really help to dry foods. Just put it on a cookie sheet and put it in the oven. It does help to have the oven door open about 2 to 6 inches for air movement. But if your oven is like mine, if I open the door, it's not gonna, the oven stops. So oven drying is not always an option, depending on the oven that you have. The best type and the most efficient method of dehydrating food is using a food dehydrator. They come in different shapes and sizes. Using a dehydrator, though, does require, keeping an eye on the food. Depending on the type of dehydrator you have, you might need to rotate the trays so that because some food on the top or the bottom might dry faster, and you need to rotate them so you can have even drying. But the plus side of it is that you will get a high quality product. It's sanitary and it's faster than just drying outside. The downside is that it's a higher cost because you are using electricity, and you do have a limited capacity depending on the size of your dehydrator. If you are going to buy a dehydrator, there's some important features to look for. Number one is you're going to want a dehydrator with a heating element. And the heating element might be on the back or on the top or the bottom. If you have one that has the heating element on the bottom, that can be a problem because moisture from the food might drip down, or sometimes as food dries, it falls through the little holes in the screen that the food is on, or if it's an herb, it might crumble. And if it falls down on your heating element, that could be a hazard. And then is nice to have a dehydrator that has a thermostat. So some of the less expensive type, they just have an on-off switch. You plug it in, you unplug it. There's no thermostat. But different foods dehydrate best at different temperatures. So a thermostat that at least has low, medium, high settings, or can heat your food from 95 to 150 degrees or 140 degrees. Having a fan or some kind of blower to improve air circulation is also key. And then your drying trays, they can either be plastic or stainless steel. And if it does have, if you find one that's got double wall, that's made out of either hard plastic, aluminum, or steel, those are a little more insulated, so they're more efficient. Having an automatic shutoff timer is nice, especially because some things take 10, 14 hours to dry, and that might be in the middle of the night. So it would help to have it have a built-in timer. If you have one that doesn't have the built-in timer, you can kind of rig up your own timer system, just like we do with our Christmas lights. You set them on a timer that's plugged into the outlet, so it will turn it off automatically. And then the dehydrators do come in a wide range of sizes. So keep that in mind in terms of how much you want to do and how much you want to spend. The shape is also a big difference in dehydrators. Generally, you can get a round dehydrator or you can get a rectangular dehydrator. And I'll talk a little more about that. Here, in comparing the design and the types of dehydrator, it makes a difference on how the air flows through them. So with the square rectangular dehydrator, the airflow is horizontal, meaning that the air comes out, the fan would be in the back, and the air will flow across the foods, which gives you a little more equal distribution of the heat, and you don't have to worry about, and the heat is in the back too, so you don't have to worry about anything dripping on the heating element. The prices vary. These come in a lot of different sizes, so they vary quite a bit depending on the size. The round type of dehydrator, which is very common, very inexpensive, that's one of the good things about it, and you'll often find them in garage sales. Those have a different type of airflow. The air flows up through the trays, and so that does cause a problem with less consistent drying of the food. And people who have those, you always have to kind of like rotate the trays. So you take the tray on the bottom and you put it on the top so that you have a little more even drying. Also, it might result in a little more mixing of your flavors if you're doing different types of food at once. But even with the horizontal airflow, I don't think I would try to dehydrate onions at the same time that I'm dehydrating fruit. You have to keep that in mind. I do want to mention freeze dryers because in some of the classes that I've done, people have mentioned these. I do know I've met one or two people who have bought these, which is, it's a big investment. But the advantage of a freeze dryer is that it actually removes 99% of the moisture and it retains 97% of the nutrients versus regular dehydrating. Even at, the best, most efficient dehydrator, you're going to end up with just 60% of the nutrients. And when I say nutrients, we mean specifically vitamin C. Vitamin C is the most labile vitamin, so it's the one that's going to be degraded most quickly. So that's the vitamin they use to measure nutrient loss in dehydrated foods or in preserved foods in general. The freeze dryer really helps to retain the original flavor of food. The food weighs a lot less, and it has a much longer shelf life. Like they claim 10 years or more shelf life, which is much more than regular dehydrated foods. And then you can also, if you have one of those, you can also use it to dehydrate meats and eggs and dairy, which cannot be done in a regular dehydrator. The disadvantage, obviously, is the cost. For a small one, it might be $2,100, and then the price goes up from there. So the medium-sized one, last I checked, was about $2,600. And it does retain the original size of the food, so it takes up more space than it would if you're using a regular dehydrator. So most people aren't going to do this, but I did want to, because of the cost, but I did want to mention that. Just in general, some helpful hints for dehydrating. Like I mentioned before, don't mix foods with strong smells because the flavors might mingle, or with really varying drying times. Use vegetable oil or a vegetable spray or cheesecloth to prevent sticking on the trays, especially with fruit. That's more likely that the food will stick on the tray. Don't overlap your food. Food should be, each piece should be separate, which takes a little time to spread the food out evenly so it's not touching. And remember, the larger the load, the more you have in your dehydrator, the more time it's going to take. And the more time it takes, the more potential for nutrient loss. And if you need to rotate your trays, and if turning the foods over, especially with fruit, if you can turn it over halfway, that'll make a difference too. So let's talk about drying fruits. First, obviously, wash your fruits, core them if needed, and then cut them into uniform pieces. The size can vary, from a whole to a halved piece, a halved peach or something, or to slices. But the uniformity is really important. So try to keep your pieces as uniform as possible. Peeling them is preferred because the peel will decrease the evaporation of the water, but you can leave the peel on in some instances. Checking whole fruits with thick skins helps to increase evaporation of the liquid, the water from the fruit. So for example, blueberries and cranberries, you're not going to be cutting them, you might be drying them whole. So in order to check them, you place them in boiling water until the skins crack, and then cool them in cold water and then dehydrate them from there. I've also heard of people drying blueberries and taking each blueberry and poking it with a pin, which seems a real labor of love, but that is another option. When you're dehydrating fruits, there are a lot of different pre-treatments that might be recommended, and all of these are to retain quality in terms of reducing oxidation, which causes browning. The picture on the left shows the apple with half of it being treated with an antioxidant and half of it not. So we all know that when we cut apples through oxidation, it turns brown. So if you want to something to store for a long period of time, like we do with dried foods, by treating it with in one of these methods, it'll prevent that browning. The apples on the right, the sliced dehydrated apples, those do have the skin on them, as you can see. Those I'm pretty sure were not pre-treated. So some of the pre-treatment methods include sulfuring, a sulfite dip, ascorbic acid mixtures, a fruit juice dip, honey dip, syrup blanching, and steam blanching. I'm going to quickly go through each one of those. But before I do, when you have directions, you'll have directions for, you're going to follow directions for your specific produce that you're going to be dehydrating. So this is just part of a fact sheet that I have that lists all the different fruit and then how to prepare it. And the pre-treatment says to choose one. So you might do sulfuring, and the recommended method varies on the produce that you have. So as you can see, for bananas, they're not recommending sulfuring, steam, or syrup blanching, but they are recommending the honey dip or the ascorbic acid solution or the fruit dip. So that's how you will know which ones you're going to want to use. So for sulfuring, this is probably the least, the one that you're least likely to use because it really has to be done outdoors. So we can't do it in the Northeast or anywhere where there's high humidity. And it does involve burning sulfur dioxide, and the fumes will penetrate the fruit, and it is really the best antioxidant treatment for retaining vitamin C and vitamin A, and it's often used for apricots. The other one is a sulfite dip, and the sulfites can cause adverse reactions in people. Some people can't even drink a wine that has sulfite in it because of the reaction, especially if you have asthma. But it is an option that I want you to know about. And for that, you would make a, you could buy the sulfite either in a pharmacy or a store that sells winemaking supplies will have that. And then you would soak your slices for 5 minutes. If you have halves, like peach halves or something, you'd soak it for 15 minutes and then rinse it before dehydrating. Probably the best thing to do for most people is to use the ascorbic acid or vitamin C as an antioxidant. And to do that, for every 2 cups of water, you just add 1 teaspoon of powdered vitamin C. You can get powdered vitamin C at a pharmacy or order it online. So if you can also use the vitamin C tablets and crush those, but they do have other ingredients other than, it's not pure vitamin C. And then you would make your vitamin C solution and soak your fruit for 3 to 5 minutes and then drain it and pat it dry and put it on your tray. This picture shows some apples that were treated with vitamin C, and you can see they're much lighter than the apples I showed you before that were not treated. And then there are some commercial products on the market, such as Fruit Fresh, you might have heard of. I'm not trying to promote any type of brand or anything, but these are not as effective as vitamin C. If you look at the ingredient list on that, it includes ascorbic acid plus citric acid, plus there's an anti-caking agent in there and a little bit of dextrose. So, and citric acid is not as strong an antioxidant as vitamin C is. So rather than buy that commercial product, I would encourage you to try to get some crystal vitamin C, powdered crystal vitamin C. You can also use fruit juice dips, especially juices that are high in vitamin C, like orange juice, lemon juice, pineapple, grape, or cranberry, and then again soak your fruit in that juice and then drain it and dehydrate it. I've done apple soaked in grape juice, and it leaves a nice pink, purplish pink tinge on the fruit. So I thought it added a nice color. But that's the other thing, these will, the juice dips will change the color, change the flavor a little bit in the color, which might not be a bad thing. Same thing with the honey dip. If you make this, it will the honey's adding up to some calories, and it's also adding some flavor, which could be a good thing. So if you wanted to do a honey dip, you would do 1.5 cups of boiling water and add 1/2 cup of sugar, then cool it and add 1/2 cup of honey. And then again, soak 3 to 5 minutes, drain, and dehydrate. Another sweet and simple thing to do is syrup blanching. So you're going to create a syrup solution with water, sugar, and corn syrup. Add your fruit, simmer for 10 minutes. Remove it from the heat and let it stand for 30 minutes, and then drain and rinse lightly and dehydrate. Again, this is adding sugar, adding calories, but like I said, that might be a good thing. There's another, if you want to do candied fruit, there are directions for candied fruit, which actually you repeat this step over a couple of days, and each time you're increasing the amount of sugar that you're putting in this solution that you're soaking the fruit in. And so over time, the fruit becomes extra sweet. Steam blanching is really the least effective antioxidant treatment. But basically, you're going to put fruit in a steamer basket over boiling water and heat it until it's heated through. When it comes to drying fruit, as you can see from the picture there, we want the fruit to be in a single layer and nothing touching for even drying. And again, you're going to follow the directions for each type of fruit regarding the pre-treatment and then the drying times. And then watch the food carefully towards the end because it tends to dry faster at the end. So don't let it get too dry. To test for dryness, fruit actually will still be pliable. You can fold it in half without it cracking. If you squeeze it, you shouldn't see any moisture come out of it. So like if you had apples, those apple pieces, if you picked up an apple piece and you tried to squeeze it and some moisture came out, you know it's not dry enough. With fruit, because it has more moisture content than dehydrated vegetables, remember we're only drying it to about 20% water content, or there's still about 20% water in there. It requires what they call conditioning, which is first cool the fruit first before you package it. And if you package it too soon, some of the moisture that's in there might be retained. And you don't want to wait too long because you've got dried foods, and if you live in a humid environment, it could pick up moisture from the air. So we do what's called conditioning to equalize the amount of moisture that's in the fruit. You're never going to get a batch of fruit that you've dehydrated that's totally evenly cut and evenly dehydrated. So if you put all that fruit in a sealed container for 7 to 10 days, it allows any of the moisture that's in, if there's more moisture in one piece of fruit than another, it will equalize. During that period of time, if you see some condensation, you see some liquid, some condensation, moisture in the jar, then you know you haven't dried it enough. You need to take it out and dry it a little more. Then once it is all conditioned and dried, then you can really seal it in a moisture-proof container for long-term storage. So for storing fruit, of course you want to store it in a dry, moisture-proof container. That could be glass jar, metal container, plastic bags. Fruit will keep for best quality. Dried fruit will keep for a year at like 60 degrees. But only 6 months at 70 degrees. So if you keep your house at like 72 degrees or 70 degrees and you have the fruit at room temperature, it's only going to keep for about 9 months at best quality. And that's why if you really want to have it last for a long period of time, put it in the refrigerator or freezer. If you go to the National Center for Home Food Preservation, they do have this video on testing fruit for dryness, and they talk about conditioning. So again, go to the homefoodpreservation.net and search for videos on there. They have some YouTube videos you can look at. Now I want to talk about drying vegetables. So of course, you're going to start with the freshest, high quality vegetables and wash them and then trim them, peel them if they need to be, and then cut in uniform pieces. You can see the picture on the right there, where all of the peppers were cut pretty much the same size, put on the tray without touching. Pre-treat according to the directions for the specific product if it's required. Again, you look on your list in the book or on the fact sheet that you have to see what's required for that particular vegetable that you have. Some of them require no pre-treatment, like peppers, for instance, whereas carrots, they do recommend blanching those before dehydrating. So the pre-treatment with blanching can be done, and blanching will help to not only inactivate enzymes that can decrease the quality, reduce the nutrient content of your dehydrated food, but it also reduces the drying time, and it will reduce the rehydrating time. So there's a lot of good reasons to blanch your most vegetables before dehydrating. So you put it in your blancher basket, submerge it in boiling water, and start timing according to the directions when the water returns to a boil. So you don't want to put too much vegetable in there at once. So it's usually they recommend a pound of vegetable per gallon of water. If it takes more than a minute for the water to come back to a boil after you've added the vegetables, then you've probably have too many vegetables in there at one time. Then after you've blanched it for the recommended period of time, you can put it in cold water to cool it down. It doesn't have to be totally cold because, again, you're dehydrating these. So if they start out warm, when you put them in the dehydrator, that'll just decrease the amount of time for it to dehydrate. You can also blanch by steam blanching. And again, whether you do water or steam blanching will be recommended in your directions. After you've blanched them for the given time, you again cool them down quickly because you don't want to cook them, you just want to blanch them, and then pat them dry. This picture here shows the difference between carrots that were blanched or not blanched, and the brighter color, the more orange carrots, obviously were blanched. So to dry them, you're going to put them on your trays and for the given amount of time. And it can take anywhere from 3 to 16 hours for vegetables to dry. And they will be crisp. You should be able to break them. In fact, some vegetables, they'll actually shatter if you hit them with your hammer. Not that I've ever done that. So this is a before and after picture of the green beans. And you can see how much they shrank in the dehydrating process. And if you picked up one of the dried beans, you could just bend it and it would break. It shouldn't be pliable, it should break. For storing vegetables, you do not have to do that conditioning that you have to do for fruits because you're dehydrating vegetables more. There's very little water in the vegetables. And then of course, store them in a dry, moisture-proof container. Metal, plastic, glass, whatever you choose. Vegetables don't last as long as fruit. They have about half the shelf life as fruits do. So just 6 months at 60 degrees and 3 months at 80 degrees. And again, for longer term storage, use your refrigerator or freezer. Again, if you go to homefoodpreservation.net, and they do have another video at that website on drying vegetables. This one's just a real short video. Let's talk about making fruit leather. This is one of my favorite things to do with dehydrating, is making leathers. Well, you can use fruits or vegetables, and it's really a fun way to mix flavors like banana blueberry or apple blueberry. Mangoes are great for making a leather also. And you can use fresh fruit or canned fruit or even frozen fruit. If you need to make room in your freezer and you've got a lot of frozen fruit in there, well, maybe it's time to make them into a fruit leather. You can also use vegetables like tomatoes, pumpkin puree, or mixed vegetables like tomato, onion, celery. I know a farmer who has obviously tons of tomatoes, and she makes tomato leather every year. And then after it's dried, you can rehydrate that and use it to make a sauce. The picture on the left here is a mango fruit leather, and the other one is a strawberry leather. So to make a leather, you're going to want to wash your fruit or vegetable and peel it if it needs to be. Cut it into small pieces, and then you can make a fruit leather from cooked or uncooked fruit. The cooked fruit will give you a better quality. It retains the color better, retains the nutrients better. And you can do that either in a double boiler or in a microwave. And then just heat them until the fruit is soft. And then you might need to do an antioxidant treatment depending on the directions. And that would be either using lemon juice or ascorbic acid to prevent browning of the light colored fruits. So that would be 2 teaspoons of lemon juice or 1/8 of a teaspoon of ascorbic acid for every 2 cups of fruit. And then you will puree it until it's really smooth. You could add honey or sugar or corn syrup if you wanted to make it sweeter. Most times fruit doesn't really require sweetening. But I do like making my fruit leather with honey. I do 1/4 of a cup of honey for 2 cups of pureed fruit. It takes longer to dry, but the dried leather is a little more like a gummy bear consistency, a little easier to chew. And the flavor, I just really enjoy having the flavor of the honey in there. You can also be creative with adding spices, flavors, and garnishes to your leather. You know, add some cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, or vanilla extract, almond extract, some citrus peels. I've made the fruit leather with shredded coconut in it, which is nice for a change, or chopped nuts or seeds added. And then for drying it, you're going to use your dehydrator. If you buy a dehydrator, they pretty much all come with solid trays for making leathers. So you'll use that. If you don't have enough of those, like the dehydrator I have only had like 3 of the sheets for making leathers. So I bought some Mylar sheets that you can get like at baking supply stores, or where they sell, you know, they're used for non-stick surfaces on a cookie tray. So it's about the size of a large cookie tray, and then I just cut it to the size that I needed and put it on my mesh dehydrating tray. You can use kitchen plastic wrap, but it's really very thin, and especially with the dehydrator, with the fan going, you know, the plastic might blow over on top of the leather, and it doesn't work out real well. But you do not want to use wax paper or aluminum foil. One thing that you could use that you might have around the house is the lining to a cereal box, because those have a little bit of just the consistency of those. You can cut those and lay those flat. You want to spread your leather quite thin, 1/8 of an inch. If you have a long knife, like for an icing knife, those work nicely to spread your leather evenly. And then dry it at about 140 degrees for 6 to 8 hours. Or if you're using the oven, it might take up to 18 hours. And to test for dryness, you're going to touch like the center. The leather's dry from the outside in. So if you touch the center of the leather and it's dry, it doesn't leave an indentation, it's probably dry. But the real way to tell is whether or not the leather peels off that tray that you're drying it on. You start with the edge and gently start to pull it away. If it pulls right off, that's great. If it's not quite dry yet, you'll notice that it's not lifting off of the tray. So then you might need to put it back in and dehydrate it a little more. To store your leathers, you roll them in plastic or wax paper, and then put them in some kind of moisture-proof container for up to 3 months for best quality, or in the refrigerator or freezer for longer periods of time. The picture there is some fruit leather that I had made. And instead of just rolling it, another option is to cut it. And I can cut it into like serving size pieces and then store it in a little snack storage plastic bag. The rolled one, I actually roll it in wax paper. I like using the wax paper better. And then I can put that roll inside a plastic bag and then take it out. And then you can actually slice off roll, like a serving size. So if you wanted to send your kids to school with some fruit rolls, you can just slice off the amount that you want from that roll and put it in a single serve bag. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about drying herbs. If you have an herb garden, you should try most herbs, again, the directions vary for the type of herb that you have, so follow directions for your specific product. But in general, we're told to harvest your herbs before that herb starts to flower. One exception is anything in the mint family. While it's in full bloom, it actually has more flavor. And then you want to pick your herbs in the morning, just as the dew evaporates. Once the sun comes out and the herbs start heating up, a lot of the essential oils that give it the flavor dissipate, and so it'll have less flavor. So you can pick your herbs in the morning, rinse them in cool water, and then shake them off. And then you can dehydrate them in your dehydrator at about 90 to 115 degrees. So this is the lowest temperature that we're going to be drying foods. Place your herbs in a single layer, and they might dry in an hour or two. You can also dry herbs by tying them in a bundle or putting them on a tray and just letting them dry in your room, or putting them in a paper bag. If you tie them up and then put them inside a paper bag, the advantage to that is that the paper bag is going to protect the herbs from dust or insects that might be around. And sometimes as herbs dry, they just kind of crumble and fall off the stem. And so if you have them in a bag, it's going to catch the herbs that might fall. You can also try oven drying with herbs. Actually, if you have a gas stove that has a pilot light, or if you just have the oven light on, that might be enough overnight for those herbs to dry. And then microwave drying is only recommended with herbs. It's not recommended for vegetables or fruits. So if you have a small quantity of herbs, this might work. You do want to use medium power or maybe even low, depending on how powerful your microwave is. But what you want to do is put them on single layers on a paper towels and then microwave for 2 to 3 minute intervals, check them, maybe rotate them, do another 2 or 3 minutes and check them. But that could be a quick way of drying small quantities of herbs. Okay, so you got all this dried food. What do you do with it? We're all used to eating dried fruit, so that's not a big problem. Just enjoy it as it is. Or if you want to, you can even plump that fruit up if you want to use it for making a cobbler for baking with. And to do that, you would cover it with boiling water and soak for 5 minutes or steam it for 3 to 5 minutes. Vegetables might take a little longer, but again, the vegetables you can boil 1.5 to 2 cups of water per cup of vegetables, pour it over the vegetables, and then let them soak until they regain almost their original size. You'll be surprised at how those shriveled down vegetables will plump back up. Or if you're going to be using them for soups, you can add them straight to the soup without soaking first. A few exceptions I've read are like root vegetables like beets and potatoes. It might be better to rehydrate them before you put them in your soup. So I hope you enjoy your dehydrated foods. Eat them quickly. You don't want to store them for too long, even though a lot of the nutrients and all the protein and carbohydrates will still be in those foods. A lot of the labile nutrients like vitamin C and vitamin A start to deteriorate over time. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I just want to end with some quality control, just to review. Always have a clean workspace. Preheat your dehydrator before you put the foods in it. avoid that case hardening, which means trying to dry it at too high a temperature. Cool them to room temperature before you package it. Don't forget to condition fruits before storing, and then store all your dehydrated foods in a cool, dark, dry conditions. And for long-term storage, use your refrigerator or freezer. These are some resources that I recommend. The first one is from the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension, which you can get at the National Center for Home Food Preservation, homefoodpreservation.com. The next one is quite similar to the first one, and this is Drying Fruits and Vegetables from the Pacific Northwest Cooperative Extension. And this one is nice because it does include some recipes for using the dried foods. And then one book that I might recommend is, or I do recommend, is How to Dry Foods by Deanna DeLong. And this, one of the advantages of this is that it does include 50 pages of recipes using the dried foods. So sometimes you get your dried fruit and then you're not sure what to do with it. So that would be useful. Again, I want to give credit to the Cooperative Extension Service, the National Center for Home Food Preservation, for allowing me to edit their presentation. And these are some of the resources that were used for my presentation. So thank you very much for attending my workshop online here. If you want to contact me, you can do so at dwitten@cornell.edu, or please check our website for more information about food preservation and links to the National Center for Home Food Preservation at ccesaratoga.org. Thank you very much.